a healing process. Like I definitely firmly believe in that. I used to sing a lot in high school and in middle school and stuff. And like for me, this relationship between art and activism is that art is just like one way of expressing the different concerns that we have about, our communities, the different issues we're facing. It's about that, but it's also a way to be imaginative and imagine what a world would be like without these different issues, and a way for people to connect with each other in a way that, like, say, like an oral speech or maybe a protest or something else like can't do in the same way. So I really appreciate what you said about art as a healing process, because I think people like Jamila Woods, people like No Name, so many Chicago artists and poets and writers that come out of this city also believe in that, and like part of their messages like have a lot to do with not only this relationship of like art being a way to let people know like about the injustices going on, but also as a way to imagine what a world's like without these injustices, and like be a way for people to heal from these injustices. So kind of going off of this relationship with the community and building community, often people say that there is miscommunication between communities and systems of power and violence, such as the police, the legal system, and even different resources that are supposed to aid the community, from like education to mental health resources and things like that. Well, one thing that me and Lena think is that, this miscommunication that people are talking about is a misdiagnosis, because it implies that there is some level of communication and productive interactions happening between communities and institutions or systems that impose violence. Do you see this as a misdiagnosis as well? How do you envision communication between community members and systems that allow for the power to be centered with the people instead of power being centered around the institutions themselves?
Yeah, I definitely also agree. There is literally no communication between community members and the systems that are oppressing us currently. We even see that, like, the push behind CPAC and literally getting, like, community group to be able to hold, like, police members accountable. And, like, that's something that's been going on for such a long time, and there's been no, like, major support behind it in terms of, like, on the elected official side. And so even thinking about, like, even what's happening right now with CPS, like, literal teachers, like the people who are literally in classrooms, who are in schools teaching students, teaching kids, are like felt like they are not being listened to. And even with the strike that happened earlier last year as well, like the actual community members who are also doing like serious work, like teachers are like such respected like positions that I just like admire so much. And especially to be teaching and in a pandemic and remote, just all this other stuff, and people aren't being listened to. So I definitely think that it's not even about miscommunication, because that would like imply that there's communication happening in the first place. So like I would say what that looks like is actually something that we're pushing right now with Good Kids Mad City, is our peace book. And so pretty much like the peace book ordinance is an opposition that we put against the gang book and the gang database that's out right now. So pretty much like this book that very racist, racially profiling. And so our kind of like other side of that is to put together in different communities, and we're trying it out in different wards right now, literally getting funding to invest into Black and brown communities on the South and West sides. And we're asking for $36.5 million out of the CPD's budget to pretty much just pay community members to de-escalate problems. It's way safer for like somebody that you're familiar with to come and de-escalate a problem than to have a cop who's not even from Chicago. And that's the other thing too, is that there's a really big dynamic of a lot of these people who are elected officials are like driving home to like Schaumburg or not even living in the city. So like there's already just like this big disconnect of even understanding like city dynamics as well. So that definitely is like a misdiagnosis for sure, because there would have to be some implication that communication is already happening in the first place, and we would not be doing all of these CTU strikes and going outside of CPS headquarters if like we were having actual communication, if we were on like the table for any of these discussions. So like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one issue that always comes up when people talk about this like communication or miscommunication is that A, they blame it on people within the communities like not wanting to communicate when that's just not the issue. The issue is like different public officials just aren't being transparent about where the money's going, what it's being spent on, how they're training police officers, and like what narratives they're fueling about the communities that police officers are supposed to quote unquote serve and protect. And also tied to that is, when this communication does happen, oftentimes it results in the co-opting of the work of community members, and like not just the co-opting of like their work, but like the language that they use to talk about their community, and also just using community members for more political gain, personal political gain, rather than actually using that like political power to serve the needs of the community themselves. That's like one thing I think is really, really prevalent in this conversation about communication, because oftentimes it doesn't happen because of the public officials. And when it does happen, it often results in like the co-option of their work, not the appreciation of their work.
Totally, like 100% agree with everything that happened, because even towards the beginning, like we just see so many, when Lori first got in and there was just all this ask of her wanting to like reach out and talk to a lot of different like youth organizations. It's kind of like a way of like, oh, like I'm talking to young people, I'm letting people know, like when she first got into office, just like making it seem like she wants to have all this communication with people, and it's really just like whoever can be like the token. And usually 9 times out of 10, the groups that she talks to or the group that she ends up like working with usually is very much so still like not for defunding CPD or not for abolishing the police. So it's also still very much so like, who are we helping? Like, are we even really listening to like the actual needs? Because if we're still working with organizations or working with people to not only use them as tokens, but then to also still get close because they still align with what she already thinks, like nothing's like being fixed, like nothing's happening. So like I like 100% agree. It's definitely very much for, I want to look good, so I'm going to talk to these organizations, but I'm also like not going to listen to them, or I'm also just only going to pick organizations who like low key don't go against any of the stuff that I'm already like running for. So yeah.
I wanted to kind of go into this next question because Chase really mentioned it well and I think articulated it beautifully. But, when we think about this current moment that we're in, we have new politicians going into office, and a lot of times they don't use a language, just like you said, abolition, defunding the police, that is too volatile, whatever they want to say. So they'll say maybe if they want to redirect, retrain, whatever it is. But again, it's that they're still there. We're still training the military that is in our communities. But I was wondering, when we're continuing to see and having politicians, these legal actors, and others who are co-opting the work of so many organizers to push their own agendas, how you're seeing that and kind of what do you think about that right now, especially in this current moment. We talked about January 6th. We talked about the summer a little bit earlier in our podcast. So if you have any thoughts on that, and then like how do we combat and resist that co-opting that's happening consistently, have some people talk about it happening in pop culture, but that of course we know that's been happening, but now we're talking about it happening in like our legal and political systems.
Yeah, I mean, one way that I think I and just like a lot of us have been trying to just avoid that is like literally just like not working with like anybody who's not like a community organizer or like anybody who's not like somebody that we know of, because we're really in this time, and this summer really brought it up so much more, like all these people who like now all of a sudden are like Black Lives Matter and yes, defund the police and oh my gosh, abolish the police. We're like, for years and years and years, the same amount of people were getting harmed by the police, the same amount of people were getting kicked out of homes, and now it's like, yes, housing justice. And it's like, y'all, like, this is stuff that like community organizers and organizers have been doing for so long. And so I think that this summer, while it was needed in terms of like, I always believe in like numbers, and this summer was a really good example of how much stuff can be done and how much movement can happen if the amount of people come out. And I think that while it's also good that so many people knew, it also felt very much so like all these like big brands who are doing like Black Lives Matter deals, and it's like all this stuff, and it's like totally not even understanding how still like harmful a lot of these the positions that they're in and the positions that these people are holding, because at the end of the day, like a lot of these lawyers and like official people who now want to get involved with like working with community members still don't understand that sometimes like they prosecuted some people, and like even like aiding in like while you want to work with us because you see that like it's popular now, you see that if you aren't somebody who's working with Black and brown community organizers, it makes you look bad. It's still also like it's like people are living like a double life too at the same time. So it's like people get on calls. I've been on calls with so many like white lawyers and so many white like people who are like, yes, I want to help, I want to give y'all advice, all this other stuff. And then it's like we see their other side to hang out with all these rich white people who are still low-key racist, still anti-Black, and it's like, what is the point? So I think like a way that I personally have just been trying to avoid or like prevent a lot of co-opting from happening is just by like not working with people who like I'm already not familiar with, or who like already know like isn't has not been doing community work until like this summer. And I know that sounds just so like I don't know, but like really if your like community organizing starts June 2020, I'm like already kind of looking very much so like not too sure, because it always is like people love to post and people love to be in these meetings and be in these spaces to like say it, but then it's also like what's happening in their circle, within their friends, within their family, and like going back to these still very much so like based in racism jobs where it's like you can get on all these Zoom meetings, all these calls, but if you're literally going back and you're still living in the life that is oppressing us, and there's no point.
One thing that I was thinking about, like, as you were speaking, was when people will show up and, like, how long will they show up for? Because, it's great that, like, you show up for protests. It's great that you started speaking out, but it's about continuing that same energy when it's not popular. Continuing that energy. It's not about just, like, being part of the resistance or like being part of the movement when everyone is. It's about showing up and doing the work and being there when like no one else is up for it, or like when other people have low energy, or like when it's not as popular in the media. Something that people just don't understand about organizing is that like it's continuous work that takes a long time, doesn't have immediate gratification, and a lot of people put a lot of collective energy into just for, certain results to come later on down the road, results that we might not see tomorrow or in the month or within the next year. And that's something that a lot of people just don't understand.
And then also too, like people, and I've seen this like so many times, and even understanding like with the pandemic happening, even before this, like summertime is always just a time where people want to come out and be outside and like go to all these actions, and like everyone loved when we did the block party on Lower Lightfoot's block, but then like people don't come when we do like the PPE pass out on like 51st. And also just like when people want to pick and choose when like stuff is also just like desirable to go to. Like everyone loves a really big action downtown, and we can march and we can do all this other stuff, but then like people aren't coming to like teach-ins, or people aren't coming to like youth summits. And it's also just like, and like performative activism, but then also just like selective performative activism is like even like another just like scale of shit. Like people will literally pick and choose when they want to like be activists, but then like even past that point, it's like when it looks cool for them to do it, and it's like it's not fun. And because like a lot of these people also too like sometimes don't stay when the action isn't as desirable or isn't as fun anymore. People who like literally leave when like they start to be like, oh, like the police actually do get violent with protesters, and people like dip, and it's crazy. Like it's definitely crazy. Like so definitely that aspect too of like people picking and choosing when like stuff is just like a desirable action, and not actually doing the like the educational aspect of this work too as well.
And I think for me, I'm from Florida, so what I found was like, I feel like a constant thing I saw this summer, and just like right now, is it's performative, but also I feel like people are also trying to take over the voices and the organizers who've been doing the work. And I'm like, okay, you should not be the one that's shouting, I can't breathe, when, first of all, you're white. This is the first time I think you've ever joined a protest. And, you know, you're leading